Notary didn't look up right away. She finished reading the page in front of her, set it down with both hands flat on top, and when she finally met my eyes, she said, "Mr. Calloway, I think you'd better read this yourself." Her voice was the kind of calm that comes from delivering difficult news to people who don't yet know it's coming. Outside her office window, a Toronto November was doing what it always does, gray sky pressing down, a few wet leaves blasted against the glass. I remember thinking it was strange that the world could look so ordinary while something was quietly shifting beneath it. That was because of my father's old pocket watch, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Roy Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I spent most of my working life as an electrician, residential and light commercial, mostly in the West End of Toronto, around Etobicoke where I grew up and where my father grew up before me. My hands are rough in the way that comes from decades of pulling wire through walls and running conduit in basements that smell like old newspaper and cat. I drive a 2014 F-150 that sounds like it's clearing its throat at every intersection. And I own a semi-detached on Kipling that I'm probably 7 years from paying off. Not rich, not struggling. Somewhere in the middle where most people live and never talk about. My father, Alec Calloway, was 81 when he passed. He'd worked 34 years at an auto parts plant in Rexdale before it closed, then bounced between part-time work and odd jobs until his knees wouldn't let him anymore. He was a quiet man, the kind who fixed things without being asked and never wanted credit for it. He had a saying he used whenever I rushed something or cut a corner. "Slow is smooth," he'd tell me, "and smooth is fast." I was well into my 40s before I understood he wasn't just talking about electrical work. He died on a Tuesday in September, maple leaves just starting to turn. My sister-in-law handled most of the arrangements, my wife's older sister, and she was efficient about it in the way some people are efficient about things that should probably take longer. Lists, schedules, phone calls. She and her husband were at my father's house within 24 hours of his passing, which struck me as fast, but I didn't say anything. I rarely did then. The service was at a funeral home on Bloor. Small gathering. People said the right things. I stood at the front next to my wife, nodding when I was supposed to nod, shaking hands when they were extended. I kept thinking about how my father had once spent 6 hours fixing a neighbor's fence after a windstorm, and no one at that service would have known it. The things people do that don't make it into eulogies. Afterward, we went back to his house, the one in Rexdale, the house I grew up in, the one with the crooked gutters he'd been meaning to fix since 2009. My wife's sister moved through the rooms quickly, opening drawers, checking shelves. Her husband stood by the door talking about estate timelines and whether the property market in that area had softened. I drifted away from them and went to my father's workshop. It was a narrow room off the back of the garage, barely big enough for 2 people, with pegboards on every wall and coffee tins full of hardware sorted by size. It smelled like machine oil and cedar. The workbench ran the full length of one wall, and beneath it, pushed to the back corner, was a metal box. Green military surplus, the kind you used to find at Canadian Tire before they stopped carrying them. My father had mentioned it to me once, about a year earlier, when I'd come by to help him replace the kitchen faucet. He'd been rummaging through the box for a wrench when he said it without looking up. "If something ever happens to me, there's something in the green box you should look at. Don't mention it to anyone until you do." I'd assumed he meant the deed, insurance papers, the kind of thing you think about at 81. I opened the box, mostly tools, a few loose fasteners, a worn tape measure that had belonged to his own father. But underneath a folded piece of chamois cloth, wrapped carefully, was a pocket watch. Old, round, silver case, scratched on one side. The kind men carried before wristwatches. It hadn't been wound in years. I brought it inside just holding it, curious more than anything. I hadn't even formed a thought about what it meant when my wife noticed it. She glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds. "That's just junk," she said. Not unkindly. She wasn't being cruel, just efficient. Pawn shops don't even take those anymore. You might as well leave it. She turned back to sorting through the kitchen cupboards. Something about the way she said it, the quickness of it, the certainty, stayed with me the way small things do when they don't fit quite right. That night I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet after everyone went home. I kept hearing my father's voice the way you do in the first days. Don't mention it to anyone. Not as a dramatic warning, just as instruction. The way he always spoke. Around 4 in the morning I went back to the green box. Wrapped in the same chamois cloth beneath where the watch had been was a folded piece of paper, the kind torn from a small notepad. My father's handwriting, careful and even the way it always was. An address in Scarborough, a name, Elaine Trottier, Notary Public, and 5 words below it, "She has been expecting you." By 8:30 I was on the 401 heading east. The drive took 40 minutes, but I took a wrong exit and had to double back, which gave me an extra 20 minutes to sit with what I was doing. My wife hadn't been awake when I left. I hadn't told her where I was going. That felt strange. I'd been married 22 years and I couldn't remember the last time I'd gone somewhere without mentioning it. But my father had been specific. Don't mention it to anyone. 20 minutes out, my phone rang. My wife. "Hey," I said. "You left early." Not accusing, just noting. "Errand," I said. "Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd get a few things done." A pause. "You didn't take anything from your dad's house, did you? We should really keep everything together until we figure out the estate properly." "Just the pocket watch," I said. "Sentimental thing." Another pause, shorter. "Right. Okay. My sister thinks we should probably get an estate lawyer moving on the property. She knows someone." "Sure," I said. "We can talk about it when I'm back." I hung up and sat with the familiar tightness in my chest that I'd learned over the years to file under "nothing I can prove." 20 minutes later, my brother-in-law called. My wife's brother-in-law, technically her sister's husband. His name was Terence, and he'd always spoken to me in the tone of someone who'd read one too many books about wealth management. "Roy," he said warmly. Too warmly for a man who'd barely spoken to me at my father's funeral the day before. "Just checking in. This whole thing is a lot. I want you to know we're here to help. The house, the estate, whatever paperwork needs moving. Don't feel like you need to handle it alone." "That's kind," I said. Your dad lived simply. That's a good thing. Makes it cleaner. Sometimes people overcomplicate these situations by digging around in things that don't need to be dug into. I glanced at the pocket watch sitting on the passenger seat. "I appreciate that," I said. "Just tying up a loose end." "Of course," he said. "Whatever you need." 2 calls, 40 minutes apart, both essentially saying the same thing in different words. Don't look too hard. Don't ask questions. I kept driving. The notary's office was above a dry cleaner on a side street in Scarborough. 2nd floor, narrow staircase, a waiting area with 2 chairs and a fake blonde that had seen better decades. Elaine Trottier was in her late 60s, gray hair cut short, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She recognized my name before I finished introducing myself. "Alec told me you'd come eventually," she said. "He wasn't sure when. Please, sit down." She took the pocket watch from me gently and opened the back casing with a tool from her desk. Inside the casing, folded 4 times, was a piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully, read it once, then slid it across to me. "He asked that you read it first." It was a handwritten list, dates and amounts going back 11 years, each entry precise in my father's careful block letters. At the bottom, a single line, account number at Meridian Credit Union, Scarborough branch. My name only. Tell no one. Elaine watched me read it. When I looked up, she opened a folder on her desk. "Your father came to me in 2018, she said. "He had concerns he couldn't take to the police, not because they weren't valid, but because he had already been labeled as someone whose concerns weren't reliable. Once that happens to an elderly person, it's very difficult to reverse." She said it matter-of-factly, like a fact about weather. He asked me to hold certain documents until someone came with the watch. He told me only his son would know where to find it. What kind of documents? I asked. She opened the folder and turned it toward me. Bank statements, notarized records, a printout of a power of attorney document from 2015, with my father's signature on it and a note in the margin in his own hand. I did not authorize the expansion of these terms. This is not what I signed. Next to it, a copy of the original document from 2013. The scope was narrow, medical decisions only. Next to that, the 2015 version. Financial control added. His signature, or something that looked like it, at the bottom. He noticed it immediately, Elaine said. He came to me within a week of receiving his copy. He was frightened, but he was completely clear. The signature on the 2015 document is not consistent with his signature from the same period on other documents. She tapped the page. He was 81 years old and he spotted it himself. I sat with that for a moment. Who holds the power of attorney? I asked. Elaine met my eyes steadily. It was filed under your wife's name. The room didn't spin. Nothing dramatic. It just got very quiet, the way a room gets when something true enters it and takes up all the air. There's more, Elaine said. She stood and moved to the door. I need to make a call. Please wait here. She stepped into the hallway and spoke in low tones for about 4 minutes. I sat and looked at my father's handwriting on the documents in front of me. The dates, the amounts, the quiet precision of a man who had decided somewhere along the line that he couldn't win in real time but could arrange the truth to outlast the lie. When she came back, she didn't sit down. Mr. Calloway, she said, I have someone who'd like to speak with you. You can say no. She opened the door and a man stepped in. Mid-50s, navy jacket, the kind of calm that comes with a job that requires it. My name is Paul Deschamps, he said. I'm a financial crimes investigator with the Ontario Securities Commission. Your father's name came up in a review last month. When you walked in with the watch today, Miss Trottier contacted me. I shook his hand automatically. Deschamps sat across from me and asked questions the way people in his profession do, organized, unhurried, nothing wasted. Who had managed my father's affairs in his last years? Who had access to his banking information, his mail? Had he ever expressed confusion or had others described him as confused? The memories arranged themselves without me asking them to. My wife taking over his bill payments in 2016 because his eyesight isn't great anymore. My wife answering when I called him some evenings, saying he was resting and she'd have him call back. He rarely called back. My wife telling me in 2019 that he'd been a little mixed up lately about dates and conversations. I'd worried about him. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Did your father ever say anything directly to you about feeling pressured? Deschamps asked. I thought about the day he'd mentioned the green box. The way he'd done it, not looking up, voice level, like he was commenting on the weather. No drama, just precision. He told me where to find the watch, I said, and he told me not to tell anyone. Deschamps nodded slowly. That's consistent with what we're seeing. He explained what he was able to explain. The Meridian account was my father's, opened in 2014, the year after the original power of attorney was filed, which Deschamps noted was itself a significant detail. The balance was substantial. The account had been locked against external access after a flagged attempt in 2017. He wrote a number on a notepad and slid it across the desk. $240,000. My father, who bought his winter coat at Value Village and kept a list of which grocery store had the cheaper eggs, had quietly set aside $240,000 and hidden it behind something that looked like sentiment. That's not the full picture, Deschamps said. We've been tracing transfers, some of them route through a numbered company registered in Ontario. He paused. Do you know a company called Terence Deschamps? He caught himself. Sorry, I need to ask about a numbered company your brother-in-law's name is associated with. Terence. Of course. I drove home differently than I'd driven out. I don't mean faster or slower. I mean, I was paying attention to different things. The way the light hit the office buildings on the 401, the radio playing something I didn't hear. I kept thinking about my father in his workshop, measuring things twice before he cut them. Not rushing, not complaining, just preparing. That evening, my wife made dinner and talked about her day. She asked if I'd managed to get everything done. I said yes. She mentioned that Terence had suggested getting the Rexdale property listed before spring because market timing in that pocket had historically been better before January. I said I'd think about it. She watched my face when I said it, just for a second longer than usual, then went back to clearing the table. That night I started writing things down in a small notebook I kept in the glove box of the truck. Dates, exact words, times. Not because I knew what I was building, just because my father would have. Deschamps called 5 days later. "We've traced the transfers," he said. "The numbered company has been receiving deposits that originate from accounts your father controlled. Accounts he controlled in name at least. The company has one director." "Terence," I said. "Yes." I sat on the edge of my workbench in the garage. "How long?" "At minimum 9 years." 9 years. My father had known for 9 years, and he had not said a word to me. For a moment I felt something close to anger. Then I remembered the way he'd looked at me that day at the kitchen sink, fixing his faucet, not looking up, keeping his voice level. He hadn't been weak. He hadn't been confused. He had been watching the situation carefully, measuring it, waiting for the cut that would hold. "There's something else," Deschamps said. "Your father had a lawyer, a man named William Ossie in Etobicoke. He's been holding something for you. He asked me to tell you directly rather than having you find out another way." I met William Ossie at his office on Dundas West the following afternoon. He was in his early 70s, soft-spoken, with the deliberate stillness of someone who had learned not to rush anything. He shook my hand with both of his. "Your father spoke of you often," he said. "He was proud of you. He said you ask questions when something doesn't sit right. He said that was rare in a person." He placed a thick manila envelope on the desk between us. "He instructed me not to give this to you until someone at Meridian or someone like Mr. Deschamps had confirmed you'd followed through," Ossie said. "Not if you found the watch and let it go, only if you went all the way." Inside the envelope were photocopies of documents I'd already seen from Elaine Trottier, but more of them, more detailed. And something else. A personal record kept in a small spiral notebook filled with my father's neat printing. Every suspicious transaction he'd noticed, every time his signature had been requested and he'd felt the terms weren't what he'd agreed to, every conversation he'd had about it that had been dismissed. At the bottom of a page dated March 2021, he'd written, "I have been told 3 times this week that I am confused. I am not confused. I know exactly what is happening, and I know I cannot stop it from here. I am leaving what I can for Roy to find. I trust him to know what to do with it." My throat was tight for a long moment. "He tried to report it informally," Ossie said quietly, "in 2019, but he'd already been framed as someone with diminishing capacity. The narrative was in place before he tried to challenge it. When family is involved and the caregiver controls the story, it's very difficult for the truth to get through in time." At the back of the envelope was a single notarized page, dated 2 years before his death. "I am of sound mind. I understand exactly what has been done to me. I am documenting this formally so that when the time comes, the truth will be there whether I am or not." I read it twice, then I folded it carefully and put it back. Ossie watched me. "He didn't expect justice while he was alive," he said. "He expected it after, and he trusted you to carry it that far." The warrants came on a Thursday morning in early December 3 weeks later. Deschamps called the night before and told me it was happening. Simultaneous. My home address and the offices of the numbered company. He asked me not to be present. I drove to a Tim Hortons on Bloor and sat with a large coffee and watched the morning traffic. At 7:15, Deshawn texted, "It's on the way." My wife was home when they knocked. She answered in her housecoat, coffee in hand. Deschamps told me later that she'd been calm at first, the kind of calm that looks like confidence but is actually preparation. When the warrant was read out, she'd asked to see it twice, asked for her lawyer's name to be noted, asked several procedural questions in a row. All of it controlled and precise right up until the moment it wasn't. Across town, Terence was pulled from a client meeting. His assistant told the officers he was very busy. The officers were politely uninterested. By 9 o'clock, both of them were in custody. I found out sitting in my truck in the Tim Hortons parking lot, watching a man scrape frost off his windshield with a credit card because he couldn't find his scraper. I didn't feel what I thought I would feel. No satisfaction, no release. Just a kind of quiet, like a door closing at the end of a long hallway. 2 days later, my wife's lawyer called. His voice had the particular smoothness of a man accustomed to managing situations he hadn't caused. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "my client believes there may have been misunderstandings in the management of your father's estate. These situations are often more complicated than they appear, and with elderly individuals, the line between informal financial arrangements and formal legal ones can sometimes become unclear." "My father was not unclear," I said. A brief pause. "She's prepared to make a substantial voluntary repayment." "Of what she took." "Of what may have been misallocated, yes." "With forged signatures." A longer pause. "Mr. Calloway, this process will be very hard on everyone involved. Your father wouldn't have wanted." "Don't," I said. Just that word. Then I hung up. That evening, I went back to my father's house for the last time before the estate process formally began. I walked through the rooms slowly. The kitchen where I'd helped him with the faucet. The small room where he'd watched the news every night. The workshop with its pegboards and coffee tins. I sat on the stool at the workbench for a while. On the shelf above the bench, where he kept his most used tools, was a piece of masking tape with something written on it in marker. Faded, probably years old. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast." I'd never noticed it there before, or maybe I'd noticed it so many times I'd stopped seeing it. On the workbench itself was a yellow legal pad, one page with writing on it. "Roy, if you're reading this here, in this room, then things have moved the way I hoped they would. I want you to know I am sorry you had to find out this way. I didn't want this for you, but I also knew that if I told you while I was alive, you would have confronted her, and she was very good at making things look like they were something other than what they were. The evidence had to do the talking. Please let it." I sat with that for a long time. The trial was 4 months later in a courtroom at Old City Hall that smelled like floor wax and recycled air. I sat in the gallery and watched the Crown lay it out in the methodical way they do, not for drama, but for permanence. Timelines, exhibits, testimony. The forensic accountant from the OSC walked through the transfers one by one, each one tagged with a date and an amount and a destination. The forged signatures were shown side by side on a screen at the front of the room. My father's real signature, with its slight rightward lean and the heavier pressure on the capital letters, and next to it the version that appeared on the 2015 documents. Too consistent, the signature of someone who'd practiced it without knowing you can't practice away the particular way a human hand moves from a lifetime of doing things a certain way. My wife's lawyer argued for leniency. Stress, grief, family complexity, good intentions mishandled. The judge listened carefully and said very little until he was ready to say the important thing. "This was not a misunderstanding," he said. "It was a sustained pattern of deception directed at a vulnerable person who had placed his trust in a family member. The court takes that seriously." 6 years. Restitution ordered. The numbered company dissolved. Terence received 3 years and was barred from acting as a director of any federally or provincially incorporated company for 15 years. His clients had found out before the verdict. Most of them had already left. I felt nothing in particular when the sentences came down. My wife's sister stopped speaking to me the same day. I got a voicemail from an aunt I'd barely seen in a decade saying I'd destroyed the family. I saved the message in case I ever needed it as evidence of something, then forgot about it. 3 months after the sentencing, I bought a small commercial unit in Etobicoke. Ground floor, big garage door, good natural light. It used to be a tile supplier. Now it's a small electrical training shop. I teach basic wiring and safety 2 evenings a week to people who can't afford trade school but want to learn something useful. I charge what people can pay. Some nights that's $40, some nights it's nothing. On the back wall above the main workbench, I mounted 2 things: the pocket watch in a small shutter box and a strip of masking tape, transferred carefully from my father's workshop shelf with his words on it. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. People ask about it sometimes. I just tell them it belonged to someone who understood that doing things right the first time saves you from having to fix them later. The Meridian account settled into my name after the probate process was complete. I kept enough to pay off the house and cover a few years of operating costs for the shop. The rest went to a legal aid fund that supports elderly Canadians in financial exploitation cases. There's an organization in Toronto that does this quietly, without much fanfare. My father would have approved of that. He never did anything for recognition. My wife writes letters from the correctional facility in Kitchener. Long ones. They alternate between explanation and accusation, and sometimes within the same paragraph. I don't respond. It's not anger, or not mainly anger. It's more that I have nothing to say that would be useful to either of us. Sometimes in the shop, when it's quiet and the fluorescent lights are humming and someone's working through a wiring diagram at the bench, I think about my father sitting alone at his kitchen table with his spiral notebook, writing down dates and amounts that no one would believe, keeping his voice level, staying steady, not weak, not confused, just patient in the particular way of someone who has made peace with the fact that they can't control the timeline, only the quality of what they leave behind. He was right about that, as it turned out. The truth doesn't rush. It just waits to be found by someone willing to look. I keep thinking about the masking tape on my father's shelf. Not the watch, not the documents, not the courtroom, just that strip of tape with his handwriting on it, faded to the point where you had to stand close to read it. He'd probably written it years before any of this started, back when it was just a reminder to himself about how to do good work. And somehow it outlasted everything that was done to him. That's the part I come back to. My father was a man who understood that the way you do something matters more than the speed of it. He wasn't educated in the formal sense. No degrees, no certificates on walls. But he had the kind of intelligence that comes from paying close attention to how things actually work, not how you wish they did. When he noticed the signature on that document didn't match his own, he didn't panic. He didn't confront anyone. He found a notary, a lawyer, a credit union, and he built something that could survive him. That's not luck. That's clear thinking under pressure, the kind that most people lose the moment something frightening enters their life. And what he did with that clear thinking was honest. He didn't try to take anything back by force. He didn't maneuver or manipulate. He documented the truth and trusted the truth to eventually do what truth does when it's given enough time and the right witness. There's a kind of integrity in that which I find hard to put words to, because it required him to accept that he might not live to see it resolved. He made peace with that. He kept going anyway. What my wife and her brother-in-law did, and I've had months now to sit with this, wasn't only illegal. It was a failure of character that had probably been building for years before it touched my father. People who exploit elderly relatives don't usually start there. They start with smaller shortcuts, smaller justifications, a slow accumulation of decisions that prioritize what they want over what's right. By the time they reach something this serious, they've long since stopped asking themselves whether it's wrong. I think about that when I'm teaching at the shop. I'm not standing in front of people telling them to be good. I'm showing them how to do something carefully and correctly, and I'm hoping the habit sticks, because that's what my father gave me without ever naming it. The habit of slowing down, of checking your work, of not cutting corners even when no one is watching. That habit is a form of character, and character, as it turns out, is what holds when everything else gives way. I won't pretend the past 2 years have been easy to carry. There are mornings when the weight of what I found out about my wife, about a decade of quiet theft, about how alone my father was in the middle of it, sits on my chest before I've had my first coffee. Grief doesn't move in a straight line, neither does trust, once it's been broken at that particular depth. But I also know this. I am standing in a shop that belongs to me, doing work that means something, because my father held on long enough and carefully enough to make sure the truth had somewhere to land. He trusted me to carry it the rest of the way. I did. That's the only inheritance that matters now. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. I understand it completely now.